Hey, everyone. So I just turned 15 3 days ago and my grandma gave me a really special and wonderful gift. She transferred the ownership of her penthouse apartment to me. My grandma doesn't live there. She lives in the suburbs but has owned the apartment for a couple of years and stays there occasionally when she wants to be closer to the city. I was really thrilled because so far, this past year and a half has sort of been terrible for me. First, my dad walked out on our family. He always had been a bit of a workaholic and never had time for me or my mom, but even then, this still came as a huge shock to me. My mother didn't even tell me about it until my dad moved out of the house silently almost a year back. Apparently they had filed for divorce already by the time they told me about it, and my parents had decided that they couldn't live together anymore because my dad was just too overwhelmed with everything. What exactly was overwhelming him? I have no idea. He didn't even say goodbye to me in person. He texted me one last time after he moved out and told me to be good. That was it. I didn't see him after that, and soon enough, my parents were separated since our state doesn't have a long waiting period. My mother got to keep the house and had full custody of my brother and me. My dad did have visiting rights, but he hasn't put them to use so far, so I don't know what's up with that. And as if that wasn't bad enough, about 2 months ago, my mother told me that she had been dating this guy, let's call him Robert, for almost 3 months. They were in love and she did not want to waste her time since she was not getting any younger, and that's why they had gotten engaged. I barely had any time to process that my mother was seeing somebody new in the same. She told me that she was engaged, and this person was going to be my stepdad. It was just a lot to take, and I was really not happy about it because I thought 5 months was too less to get to know what kind of a person her fiancé was, but she told me not to worry about it. She introduced me to him 2 weeks later and he seemed really closed off and aloof with me. However, he behaved quite differently with my brother and was very playful with him. At the time, I only thought it was because my brother was just 4 years old, so it was probably easier to be more playful with him. But a couple of weeks later, my mother told me something that completely changed my perception of both of them. So 2 weeks back, my mother told me to sit down with her and informed me that the reason her fiancé and she got engaged so quickly was because he had been offered a really great position and he was about to take it up. But for that, they would have to move away and live out of state, so they intended on leaving me here with my grandmother because she didn't think that I would want to leave everything behind with them. However, I told her that I would be fine with moving away if it meant that I would get to stay with my mom because I had already had my dad walk out on me. I didn't want the same with my mother as well. But she tried to convince me that it was a bad idea because my school was here, all my friends were here and I was happier here, but I insisted on accompanying her. Eventually, she just blurted it out. She wanted me to stay back because Robert only wanted my brother to come along with him because he was young and he could still build a good relationship with him, but I was too old and I would never be his daughter in the true sense. And apparently, he had not liked the fact that I had tried to tell my mother that 5 months was too quick to be engaged to somebody who didn't even know properly. He thought that I was still stuck mentally in the time that my mother and my father were married and wouldn't be able to adjust with him. And my mother believed the same, which is why she wanted me to stay and figure out my life on my own. I was really hurt by this opinion of her because if nobody else, at least I expected my mother to be on my side and not abandon me just because Robert wanted her to. It's not that I had any issue living with my grandmother. She's a wonderful person and I really love her, but I also love my mom. So I was really hurt and I tried to argue with her, but it was just not worth it. So I told her that I didn't want to wait until they moved away. I wanted to move in with my grandmother that day itself. Of course, it was not possible for the move to be arranged that day, but within a few days, I was packed and ready to move out. My mother tried to convince me that she still loved me, but this was just her looking out for herself because she really loved me and she wanted to give herself a shot at happiness. For the last couple of days that I spent at home, I did not even speak to my mother, and I did not even say goodbye to her on the day that I left. To be honest, I did not think that it was worth it, and the only person that I actually said goodbye to was my little brother because I was definitely going to miss him. Anyway, since then I have been living with my grandma and she has been very empathetic. My grandma, for the record, is my mother's mom. I have absolutely no relationship with my other grandparents, which is not surprising because they barely even had a relationship with my father. She has been exceptionally kind and caring and life has been pretty easy so far with her because she really seems to love me and she thinks that what my mother is doing is horrible. And apart from the time that it takes for me to get to and back from school, everything is pretty great here. I keep in touch with my brother and I call my mom every evening just to speak to him. We don't speak to each other even then. And then, 3 days back, I celebrated my birthday at home. To be fair, I did not organize the party, it was my grandma. She invited a couple of my close friends from school by stalking me on Facebook and some selective relatives. It was a huge surprise to me and it kind of cheered me up because I had been feeling really low after my mother dropped me off here. After we cut the cake though, my grandmother announced the gift that she had for me and that was a huge surprise. She told me that for now, her lawyer is going to act as the trustee for the property, but as soon as I turn 18, it's all mine. That was the best bit of news that I have received in quite some time and I had no intention of sharing it with my mother, but yesterday, I got to know that she had been told about this gift that I received from my grandmother. Probably by someone at the party. I don't know who and it doesn't matter now, but I was really annoyed when she called me up last evening to tell me that she had heard about the gift that my grandmother was giving me, and after speaking to Robert, they had decided that he wanted to adopt me as long as I convinced my grandmother to transfer the ownership of that property to him. I don't know why, but she actually expected me to be happy about this news because now I could finally come along with them. But I was actually not happy at all, and I told her that I would not be doing anything of this sort and there was no need for her to call me anymore. Then I hung up, but she called me again after a couple of minutes, but this time, I didn't even pick up. So then she texted me, and here is the text that she sent. I'm really sorry if you felt bad that I was trying to play by Robert's rules and live life on his terms, but you need to understand that after your dad and I got divorced, he was the only person who was really there for me. Of course, I had my family to support me, but that's different. He was there for me emotionally and even financially. You don't know about it because I have never let you feel it or even spoken to you about it because I don't want you to think negatively of your father, but he's not exactly a very generous man. The settlement and alimony that I'm receiving from him is absolutely dismal and the child support is ridiculously low. And I hope you haven't forgotten that your father was actually the primary breadwinner of our family, not me. I'm lucky that he left the house to me because otherwise, I probably wouldn't even have been able to afford rent. Our lifestyle has always been very expensive, you know that. I never had to worry about money when I was with your father, but after he left, things changed. And I couldn't let you feel that, but even after picking up extra shifts at work, I couldn't match your father's income. When I started dating Robert, he was the one who was there for me. He was the one who stepped up, and I know that he has not exactly been kind to you, but that's just because he has had past relationships where children have become a bone of contention and eventually led to a breakup. We have to think about his trauma as well, and also, I knew that my mother would definitely take great care of you, so I knew that I was leaving you in good hands. It's not like I actually abandoned you. You were living with your grandmother, and even you know that she never would have let you feel alone. I just wish that you were able to think about my happiness, and now that I have arranged for you to come with us, I want you to take us up on that offer and do what Robert expects of you so that the two of us can be together at least. Even your brother misses you a lot. I know that you're angry, but I also know that you love me and I love you. So, reply soon. I love you. And that message did give me a pause, but that last part really got under my skin because just because she wanted to do everything that Robert asked her to, she expected me to do the same as well. It was ridiculous, entitled, and weak, and I thought that my mother had lost all individuality, so even though that message initially softened me, it eventually just left a bitter taste in my mouth. So I replied to her after half an hour, and I told her that I would not do anything that Robert had asked me to and she could move away with him and leave me with my grandmother like she initially planned on doing. I had nothing more to say to her because honestly, her behavior was very disappointing, and when I spoke to my grandmother about it, she told me that no matter what happens, she's not transferring the ownership of that property to Robert because she barely even knows the guy and she definitely does not trust him. She was pretty sure he would just sell that apartment and I wouldn't even get a single dime out of it. So in a way, it's good that I did not agree to my mother's proposition. However, she was not going to take no for an answer this morning. She showed up at my grandma's place with my brother. Luckily, I was at school when she came by, and as soon as I saw her when I entered the living room, my grandmother wasted time filling me in on the purpose of my mother's visit. My grandma told me that she was here to talk to me in person about the proposition that she had suggested last night, and I had ignored it. So I clarified that I had not ignored anything. I had indeed replied to my mother's message, and I had been very clear about what I wanted. I wanted her to stick to her initial plan because I was not going to convince my grandmother to transfer the property to Robert because we did not trust him. And I have been very clear about it, so I did not know why she was still confused. I was very curt and had a big time tone, but can you even blame me? Anyway, my mother started crying and said that she was just trying to make everyone happy, but no matter how hard she tried, it just didn't work. I got really pissed off that she was sitting here in the living room and crying when it should actually be me because if anything, I have been the one who has been treated like absolute crap by both my parents. So I told her to cut it out and said that she had it totally backward. She wasn't trying to make everyone happy, she was just trying to make herself happy and expected everyone to bend over backward just for that. And maybe everyone else was willing to do that, but not me. I had a life ahead of me and I was not going to ruin it by running after her, trying to make sure that she was alright. That caught her by surprise and soon after, she left. Later on, I realized that she had blocked me and now I feel kind of guilty about what I said. So I want to ask Ida for telling my mother that she was selfish and only cared about her happiness? Update 1. Hi, everyone. So first of all, before I begin, I just want to thank everyone who took out the time to comment on my original post. It really opened my eyes, and yeah, I guess there are a lot of points that I did not consider before. It hadn't even occurred to me that my mother's relationship with Robert had been going on since even before the divorce. She might just be telling us about it now because it's easier and more convenient for her since the divorce is done with and we would be none the wiser. Honestly, the reason I hadn't thought about it was because no matter what, I couldn't imagine my mother to be a cheater. But now, I'm honestly not sure. She could be, for all I know. Anyway, that's really none of my business anymore because she has made it sufficiently clear that she wants nothing to do with me. The only way it's inconveniencing me is because I can't speak to my brother anymore, and I miss him. He and I always got along really well, and I hate to think that he might be Robert's kid like a lot of you have suggested. I'm trying not to think about it, but now that people have started talking about it, it's very hard for me to ignore. I really do want to find out the truth, but I'm scared. I have discussed these possibilities with my grandmother at length for the past couple of days after I made that post, and while we have not been able to come to a conclusion about what is the truth, it has become very difficult for us to think about my mother in the same way. I feel like talking to my father about this might give us a lot of insight, but I don't even know if he would want to discuss this with us. So far, it's been 4 days since my mother visited us and we have had no contact with her since then. On the first day, my mother had blocked me, but later on, my grandmother told me that she had blocked her as well. It's kind of ungrateful of her. To be fair to my grandmother, she has been taking care of me without even expecting my mother to pay her child support because my grandmother has money of her own. It's out of pure kindness and love for me that my grandmother is taking care of me. I can't imagine anybody giving up their time of relaxation after their retirement to take care of their grandkids, but my grandmother is doing exactly that. And I feel like my mother should be grateful for that, but instead, she has blocked her. There are just a lot of things that I'm angry with my mother about, and there are a lot of questions that I still have no answers to. I'm just really hoping that eventually, it will all come out in the open. Update 2. Hey, everyone. So this is going to be a bit of a long update because today, around the evening, my father came by to visit. My grandmother had apparently contacted him, but she hadn't told me about it because she wasn't even sure if he would come by and she did not want to give me false hopes. Anyway, he did visit as soon as he found out that my mother was engaged to Robert. There have been a lot of revelations and I'm still trying to process them, but I will try to talk about it here. I was quite surprised to see him, but even more surprised when he hugged me and told me that he was really sorry about everything. Eventually, he sat me down and started telling my grandmother and me everything that he knew. He told me that he and my mother had started falling out of love a really long time ago, but they had stayed together for the sake of my happiness because they didn't want to break up this family and put me through the trouble of coming from a broken home. And then about 3 years ago, my dad started an affair with a coworker. He really wanted to tell my mother about it, but never found the courage to do so. Eventually, she found out about it herself about a year ago, and that was when she filed for divorce. She told him that she would keep quiet about it only if he stayed away from us. She set forth a bunch of conditions like he would leave the house to her entirely and that she would have full custody, and even though he would have visitation rights, he would not be allowed to visit us until she said she was fine with it. She had also demanded an exorbitant amount of settlement, alimony, and child support, and he had agreed to all of it. The only thing that he wanted in return was that she would keep his affair a secret and never tell me anything about it because he didn't want me to hate him and think of him as a cheater. So far, she had held her end of the deal, but it had come at the cost of having a relationship with me. He also apologized to me for always being a workaholic and never doing enough to build a bond with me, but in his defense, it was my mother who always wanted more, and that's why he was forced to work all the time, because the kind of lifestyle that she wanted, he couldn't afford that unless he was slogging day and night. He told me that it was not an excuse, but even then, he wanted me to know that it was not entirely his fault. I kind of understand, but it's still difficult for me to come to terms with it. But anyway, he told me the reason he had broken his promise to my mother and came to see me without asking her first was that, in the message that my grandmother had left him, she had mentioned Robert by name and said that she wanted to ask if my dad knew him. So that's why he had rushed to come over, because apparently, not only did he know Robert, but he also knew exactly what kind of a person he was and had come by to warn us about him. Apparently, my mother, my dad, and Robert had all been part of the same circle in college. My parents had been together, but Robert had always had a crush on my mother, and on the night before graduation, they had all been out drinking, and Robert had confessed his feelings to my mother. At the time, my mom was with my dad, so she obviously rejected his advances. But she didn't tell my father about any of it until 2 weeks later, and then, she told him that she was confused about her feelings, so they went on a break. My dad told me that they were on a break for almost 2 months, and in the meantime, he had a couple of friends that she had gone out on a date with Robert. But it did not go well, and eventually, she came back to him. Once they patched things up, my dad told her that he didn't want her speaking to Robert again because that would make him uncomfortable, and for a while, she agreed. However, later that year, he found out that she had never cut him off, and that led to a huge fight, after which they almost broke up. But then, Robert visited my dad's apartment after that fight, and they ended up in a physical brawl because Robert thought that it was what was going to impress my mother. Instead, she got mad at him for being violent, especially after she had already told him that she just wanted to be friends with him and nothing more. So eventually, she cut him off. My dad told me that Robert had always been unhinged and had never been up to any good. After my mother cut him off after college, he moved away and nobody heard from him for years. But now, he thinks that my mother and Robert must have reconnected a couple of years back because she had mentioned hearing from a couple of friends that he was back in the city. He wasn't sure exactly at what point my mother started speaking to Robert again, but if they were engaged, then that definitely meant that she had also been cheating on him and all the conditions that she had set were null and void. My dad told me that he's going to confront my mother, but before he did that, I wanted to speak to her and get to the bottom of what was going on. So he has promised me that he's going to wait for that, and after I'm done speaking to my mother and hearing her out, he is free to do whatever he wants. I'm still trying to process all of this, so it's complicated in my head because I really don't know who to believe. Neither of my parents has been good to me and it's just really messy. Update 3. So I finally spoke to my mother and I did not tell her about my meeting with my father. I just wanted to talk to her independently and see what she had to say. She had blocked me, so I had no other choice but to visit her and show up unannounced. 3 days ago, my dad visited me, and yesterday, I finally worked up the courage to talk to my mother. She seemed surprised to see me at the door but still invited me in. Thankfully, Robert was not at home at the time, so I could make myself comfortable and speak to her freely. Initially, I apologized to her, but that was just for show, so she would talk to me openly. I beat around the bush for a while and told her that I was just finding it very difficult to accept Robert into our family so soon, and that's why I've been acting out. And then, I got down to business. I hinted to her that I had been thinking about it and it just didn't add up that my mother had met someone as wonderful as Robert so soon after her divorce. It just seemed to be really convenient. That was the perfect opportunity for her to come clean about the truth, that she had known Robert from her college days. But she didn't say that. She just told me that she really was lucky to have found him, and that was it. I knew for a fact that my dad was telling the truth about all three of them being friends since college, since he had pictures. The only thing that I was doubtful about was the authenticity of the story that he had told me about the three of them. But as soon as my mother lied to me point blank about never having known him earlier, I knew who to trust. But then, my mother decided to make it worse for herself by telling me that she had never intended to let me know about it, but the reason she had rushed into this engagement with Robert and agreed to move away with him because she just really wanted to forget all about my father and every trace of him from her life. And then, she told me about his affair, the one thing that she had made my father sacrifice everything for, and promised him that she would never let me know. After that, I did not see any reason for me to sit around and talk to her. I just told her that I would see her later and then left. As soon as I was out of there, I called my father up and told him that he was free to do whatever he wanted to do because now I knew the truth, and I knew that my dad was not lying about anything that he said. So now, my mother is going to finally get hit back by karma. I'm not saying that my dad is suddenly absolved of everything, but at least he's not as bad as my mom. Update 4. Hey, everyone. So I have many things to talk about. Firstly, everyone was concerned about whether my brother was my dad's kid or not, and frankly speaking, I was too. But last month, after my dad confronted my mother, they had a paternity test conducted, and thankfully, my brother is indeed my dad's kid. So now, my dad is fighting for full custody, and since I'm 15, I can just say that I want him to have full custody, and I'll take that into account. However, I'm still living with my grandmother because even though my dad is trying to fix things, there are still many issues that we have to work on, and until then, I just want to live with my grandmother because I'm always sure of her. My mother was furious when she found out that my visit to her had only been with the purpose of finding out the truth about her and Robert, and since then, she had only unblocked me once to curse me out and then blocked me again. We haven't spoken since. As for Robert, he dumped my mother as quickly as he had gotten engaged to her, as soon as he found out that my dad was fighting to get the alimony and child support reduced. Apparently, he had been lying to my mother all along because there really was no job offer. His plan had been to join his uncle in his business, which already wasn't doing too well, and he was going to use my mother's money to fund that. And obviously, that was also the reason he was asking my mother to convince me to transfer the property that my grandmother had gifted him to me. They had been together for the past 2 years and he had been stringing her along for all of it. So basically, my mother got screwed over, and instead of being ashamed of it, she has been telling all her friends about it just to badmouth Robert, but she doesn't realize that her friends have been gossiping about her, and that's how my dad found out, and eventually, I did as well. I'm just really thankful that my mother decided that she wanted nothing to do with me as soon as Robert said the word, because I would hate to be stuck with her right now. Anyway, my dad and I have decided that we are going to try and work on our relationship, and he has promised me that he's going to try and be a better father to me from now onwards, and as soon as he manages to get full custody or even shared custody of my brother, we are going to try and be a happy and functional family. I don't know about the functional bit, but the least we can do is try to be happy.